adamant that that staff think that way, and I think it's good. And we talked about the long-standing Crown Vics, and those are going to be obsolete, so I don't need to go over that again. Can we go to our first slide? We thought we'd throw the mission statement up there. The mission of every police department is the protection of life and property, and everything that we do and everything we spend funds on should relate either directly or indirectly to that cause. This is just a breakdown of our organizational chart. It's very typical, provides more detailed breakdown of the department's organizational structure, lines of authority, and span of control. The structure is typical of what you would find in G. Douglas Gorley's book, Effective Municipal Police Organizations, which closely represents our agency and other agencies similar to ours in size and complexity. The next slide. One of the things I sent Council, and I know that most of you received it, was how over a year ago, working with the previous chiefs, talking to staff, talking to council members about how we arrived at a minimum staffing for the police department. And it really comes down to how many hours do you have to fill for a 24/7 operation, and how many hours do you get out of a single employee. And you take those hours and divide it into it, and it gives you a baseline. After you deduct vacation, sick leave, time away for training, and those things, and it gives you at least a baseline of where do you think you might be. And by the way, this department in the past had as many as 26 sworn versus 19 sworn we have now. They had a captain, 2 lieutenants, 16 officers. So, and we did model at that time Hillsborough, and I understand Hillsborough still has that, has that organizational structure. So I do think we're kind of lean, and I think it's where we need to be, particularly right now. I think the struggle with that, though, is keeping the vacancies filled. Most of you probably were here when we introduced Officer Barron. The process to get an officer through the academy and then through all the background, the medical, the psych evaluations, the FTO program, which is 4 to 6 months, depending on how well they do, and then they need to make it through probation. It's pretty significant. And until they're out on their own, after the FTO program, we really can't count them as a fully functional standalone officer. So even though we've got one in the training program with Officer Barron, we still have one in backgrounds and we have one other vacancy out of the 12 police officer vacancy. We were down as many as 4 out of that 12. And that drives up your overtime and stresses the organization. So that is the authorized staffing from last year, and it's what we're bringing forward this year. And those are the approved positions. Authorized means that's what we're budgeted for, that's what council approved. Assigned staffing is how many people we have in those positions. So it's authorized and assigned. Next slide. One other thing before I talk about this, I wanted to remind the council that we have a total with our dispatchers and our community service officer, that previous slide, of 25 full-time employee positions. However, one thing I want you to keep in mind is we have 9 per diem dispatchers, we have 5 reserve officers, we have 4 volunteers, so we have 18, part-time and volunteers, which provide a lot of service at a much reduced rate to the department. There are expenses with that, but I think those are undershadowed by the benefit. But I continue to look at that and sharpen my pencil and evaluate those positions. This pie chart vividly demonstrates a significant portion of the overall $5.5 million police budget that goes to personnel, salary, and benefits. 90%, and that is, in classes I've taught on budgeting for police, I've said that, you know, salary and benefits in just about every law enforcement agency, it runs anywhere from about 75% all the way up to 90%. And generally speaking, the smaller the department, the larger piece of the pie it is. Large sheriff's department or a large police department that has big operations, lots of equipment, and capital expenses. Sometimes those pieces of the pie, the operating expenses grow. But that's significant, and I think what should be abundantly clear to everybody looking at that is if significant cuts have to occur to the police department, you can guess where it's coming from. I think that's it on the slides. Do we have another one? That concludes my portion of the briefing. I guess later, if there's any questions that or things you want me to follow up on, please let me know. Go ahead.
Two questions, Ed. One, I know gas, of course, is going up in price, and I assume that when you select the new vehicle to replace the Crown Victoria, you'll take that into consideration as well as the price of the vehicle. But years ago, when I looked into all the cost of the gasoline for our vehicles and the fact that we have a contract with Redwood City to obtain our gasoline, one of the things that struck me was our town has a policy which is different from some of the other towns. And the policy, at least at that time, was that we did not allow our vehicles to go below half tank. And the reason that I was told was because if there's an emergency and those pumps shut down for some reason, they wanted to make sure that the cars had at least half a tank of gas. And I suggested that given the fact that it takes probably 15 minutes to get there because I work there and that's just half a block away, 15 minutes to get there, and then you have to fill up, and 15, and perhaps wait in line, and 15 minutes to get back, so it's a half an hour of your time. Wouldn't it be better to, in the case of an emergency where those pumps might not be available, to go to a local gasoline station and pay a higher rate than to all the times you're spending half an hour extra of your time to pay that higher rate for gasoline than to continually spend that additional time, man time, and vehicle distance in saving that marginal cost on the price of gasoline. It didn't make sense to me. So I called around other jurisdictions and asked what their policy was, and many of them didn't have that half tank. It was higher. Do we still have that policy?
You know, I can't tell you what our unwritten policy is about that, but I recently did a very careful analysis of this entire thing because I heard it a number of times. And we looked at the price of the gas at the pump. We evaluated what, I think it was Mayor Whitmer that asked me to do this, and I'll see if I could find that staff report. But we did a careful analysis of the distance of time. I know that the officers are very keen on not going during commute times if they have to go. And a lot of times they go in the evenings. But the gas was significantly cheaper than Menlo. I think we talked about.
Yeah, we talked about using the Menlo Park, but I think Councilmember McKeithen's question is not necessarily the distance, but because we're driving to Redwood City, we could maybe save some time, and I guess over time it would overcome itself. But if we fill up with only a quarter tank,
right,
or something like that, other than a half a tank, I think is really what her question. My question was, Menlo Park is a lot closer, and they're, you know, essentially almost just down the street. Why didn't we fill up there?
No, the question was at a higher threshold,
right,
rather than going. The price of gasoline clearly is cheaper there, but at a higher threshold, because the emergency is unlikely. It's not likely that it's going to happen. And in the rare instance it does happen, then you could absorb that marginal cost. Whereas that going back and forth every time it hits half a tank, which is very often, because I went through all those sheets. I mean, it's dozens and dozens, I mean, a couple hundred times in a month for all the vehicles. That's a lot of time. It really adds up. So compared to a 2/3 tank, it would make a big difference in the cost in the vehicles between the gas you use going back and forth and the time. It seemed to me that that could be a big cost savings. And it was not the industry standard from what I saw in other jurisdictions.
We could certainly take a closer look at that, and I think we did explore that, many, many months ago when we looked at that entire picture. But let me see what I can dig up on that, and we'll take a closer look.
I just asked that you look at it. Also, this is something that just hit my eye, an ergonomic chair. I just saw that in 2012, I guess there was an appropriation for $900 and a recommended appropriation for dispatch for $8,000. Is that more than one chair, or what's that for?
I would have to look at that. I don't know if there was, I don't know when that occurred or what.
It hasn't occurred yet.
Yeah.
Do you know?
We'll look at it.
Okay. It's an expensive chair if it's one.
Well, actually, that's the $8,000 is the sum of 5, 1, and 2 there. So there was only $900 in the current year. $8,000 is the sum of the items that are budgeted for this year.
Okay, thank you.
We need ergonomic chairs up here.
We'll give it. Okay, thank you.
I asked for them last year. If they would get them.
May I make a comment? Sure. I just noted that Redwood City's charge for maintenance is going up by a third, I think. It's $10,000, but it's going up by a big percentage. And also noted that the number of services provided by San Mateo County are on the rise. Is this reflecting their budgets and cost increases, or?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't know that there's any organization on the peninsula that's not being hit in one way or another by rising costs. And
Thank you.
well,
On the overtime, I understand from your write-up earlier today that indicated, as you also pointed out, bringing an officer on board does take substantial time to get up to speed, and I'm sure you did a lot of analysis on the $140,000 worth of overtime, but hopefully we can manage that down and keep an eye on it. As Councilmember Davi brings up, should we approve the budget, it's not necessarily it's a budget that we want you just to go spend to that level.
Well, I can assure you that's not how I manage the.
I know that, we know that. I just thought I'd say that, make that comment to you.
Yeah,
not to you, but to the city manager before, and she suggested I bring that up as well. So.
We have things that are out of control, like POTUS visits. They take a lot of resources to work with Secret Service and manage some of those processes. We have the mutual aid agreement with our counterparts on the peninsula. So we're hoping that we come in under that, hopefully. But we need to have something set aside should we need it.
Good, thanks.
You ready to move on to the next one? Okay, we'll turn it over to Mike.
This is Mayor Whitmer, members of the City Council. This evening I'm going to give an overview of several of the departments within community services. First, the building department and then public works. With regards to the building department, as all of you know, beginning late August of this year, the building services has been contracted out, being performed by MLS Consulting Group. Next slide. So the question is probably, has the town of Atherton benefited from contracting out building services? And in looking at that, we're looking at it from a quantitative basis, which is some savings, and also qualitative basis. With regards to the savings, the FY 12-13 proposed budget, as compared to the current year budget, represents a savings of about $183,000. So what we're proposing in this upcoming year is $183,000 less than our current year. What we also did was we took a look at years before that. Fiscal year 10-11, that was kind of a mixed year where building service was primarily performed by town staff, but was supplemented with a contract building official as well as contract plans examining firms to assist with the plan checking. And when we compare the proposed 12-13 budget with the expenditures for 10-11, it represents about a $207,000 savings. And then going back one more year, FY 2009-10, in that year, building services was totally performed by town of Atherton staff. It was performed by a staff of 6 people. And when we compare our 2012-13 proposed budget with that budget, it represents a savings of about $239,000. So those are some of the quantitative differences at this point. You know, another thing that we took a look at is some additional benefits that we think the town is seeing. The first one is budget stability. And what I mean by that is that by the current model that you have now, our expenditures, which is the majority of your costs, your expenditures for the building department, is a function of your revenue. So if your revenue is low, your expenses are higher, or low if your expenses, or if your revenue is higher, then the expenses are higher. And that's quite different when you have a full-time staff, because regardless of what the revenue is, you're going to pay for that full-time staff. So as an example, just to give you an example, going back to FY 2019, the town had 6 full-time building services staff. The cost for that staff was a little over $1 million per year. And for that particular year, the building revenue was $901,000. So because again, you had that fixed cost of staff, the town realized had a deficit of $167,000. So in that year, your expenses exceeded your revenues by $167,000. Now, if you were to have had a model then like you do now, where your expenses would have been 58% of the $900,000, the difference to the town would have been $234,000. And so that's what I mean by it has provided you budget stability, because by having a contract model like you do, basically you have shifted the risk from yourself to your contractors. Because what we're committed to do is provide you 4 full-time staff. Whether you have a revenue of $500,000 or $1 million, we're still providing 4 full-time staff. So by doing this, you've essentially shifted that risk from the town to the private sector. Another thing is service improvements. As part of our contract, we have a 10-day turnaround on major plan reviews. Now, to be honest, there wasn't any town records on what the turnaround times were previously, but anecdotally, in talking to the customers that come in, they're very appreciative, because what we're now doing in 10 days or less was taking in 2 to 3 months in the past, and in some cases longer than that. Also, by a contract revision that the council adopted last month, it also puts in performance standards. So what it does there, what you've done there, is that if we, for whatever reason, do not perform per our turnaround time, then we're going to be penalized, and the amount of revenue that we get from the town is decreased. And then another thing is customer feedback. One of the things that we did, as I think I indicated several months ago, is we are now surveying the customers. And to date, we've received about 15 or 16 surveys back. In all the surveys, we've received the highest marks in every single category. And if I can, I'd like to just share, they're actually taking time, in addition to just checking the boxes, they're actually taking the time to provide comments. One comment was, this is a great improvement in turnaround time, referring to the plan reviews. Another comment was on our inspection services. The commenter said, the inspector is diligent but fair. He's willing to be flexible and timely, and he's very good at returning to review the corrections that I was asked to make. Comment on our plan review. It was done on time with clear comments and constructive feedback. And then the last one that I'll share is comment was that everyone at the building department is awesome, the best group we've ever worked with. So those are some of the comments that you're receiving from customers. And I think the third qualitative benefit is that you now have a staff of certified engineers and plans examiners. Your chief building official is a licensed civil engineer, and he's a certified plans examiner and a certified building inspector. The plans examiner, he's a graduate civil engineer who has done graduate studies in structural engineering. He's also a certified plans examiner and a certified building inspector. And your building inspector is a certified building inspector. And in addition to that, they are supported by 3 licensed structural engineers. We feel that's very important because of the types of homes that are built here in Atherton and because of the seismic zone that we are in. There are many very complicated structural systems as part of the houses. So in many cases, we utilize our licensed structural engineers to do those plan reviews. Next slide, please. So this next slide is, I'm going to review with you, give you an overview of the Public Works Department operating budget. The Public Works Department consists of 5 funds: engineering, street maintenance, park programs, and building maintenance. The proposed operating budget for Public Works this year is $1,450,000. Again, comparing that to the current fiscal year, the budget's being proposed for FY12-13 represents a savings of $380,000 over what the current year budget is. And this current year is also a blend because the first quarter of the year, maintenance was performed by town staff, and the last 3 quarters of the year, beginning in mid to late September, the maintenance was taken over by MCE as your contract maintenance providers. When you go back and compare the proposed operating budget this year to FY10-11, which was 2 years ago when we had a full-time staff, town employees, the proposed budget represents a savings of over $500,000. So those are the savings that you generated from contracting out your maintenance services. The engineering fund, Fund 50, that fund pays for basically the time, my time, your engineering staff time. The work done on the capital improvement program management delivery comes out of that fund, as well as any type of technical studies that's required in the town. Street maintenance, which is Fund 53, that pays for all the street maintenance, signing and striping throughout the town, traffic signal maintenance and repair, street light maintenance, and also drainage maintenance. Park maintenance, which is Fund 57, that fund pays for all maintenance activities associated with Homer Palmer Park, and that includes the structures. So in other words, the park maintenance budget includes costs associated with the city manager's house, the main house, the pavilion, and the carriage house. The one caveat is that it does not include costs associated with the tennis courts. As you already reviewed, the tennis is a separate fund. The next fund, Fund 59, is building maintenance. And building maintenance is dollars associated with the maintenance and repair of all facilities in the town, with the exception of the facilities at Homer Palmer Park, Holbrook Palmer Park. And then also, as part of the budget this year is the 5-year CIP, which is part of your proposed budget that's in your packet. The information contained there is exactly what we presented several weeks ago during your budget workshop. A couple things to review is that although this is a 5-year CIP, it's really a 5-year planning tool that identifies anticipated capital improvements. It is updated annually to reflect, the most current transportation and community priorities. So in other words, by approving this budget, you're not approving a 5-year capital improvement program. You're only approving the costs associated with fiscal year 2012-13.
What we need on that, Mike, is, and I spoke to Teresa yesterday, was that on some of the items that are specifically big ticket items, we want to make sure that funding it 1 year, that we won't actually cause a problem if for some reason we can't fund it the next year. So as those projects get, as you bring those up again for next month, if you make sure that anything that would prejudice the need for us to spend an additional amount or the forecasted amount the second year, because you've already started something and, you know, let's say the wall, then suddenly, if we don't do it, then it's already been weakened because we've already done some construction, and it makes the chances for it to fail the next year. So that would be good input. Okay.
Okay. Also, one of the things about the CIP, as you see in the CIP document as part of your budget packet here, is that it involves 10 different funds. And what we try to do in determining what funds we ought to use is that our strategy was to heavily utilize the parcel tax and the road construction fee. And what we try to do is, to the best of our ability, keep in reserve your gas tax and your measure funds. And the reason for that is because those are the most flexible funds. The other reason for that is that, and in fact what's different about this year as well, is that by doing that, there are some operating costs that are gas tax eligible. So what is also included in your proposed budget, in the Public Works operating budget, is that there are operating costs associated with staff in engineering and in street maintenance that have historically been funded through your general fund, but we've been able to shift that funding to gas tax. And I think the total that we've been able to shift away from your general fund as a result of this funding strategy is about $160,000 this fiscal year. So that's something else that's different that I wanted to bring to your attention. And I think that's it, unless there's any questions.
We're going to go over the CIP just real briefly. Is it later on? Is that correct?
We're happy to answer any questions. We weren't going to go over our same presentation that we made earlier, but we can go over any of the projects you'd like to discuss.
Sure. First off, and I'm not sure where I saw it, Mike, I think that you have a $90,000 document, the document imaging system in your budget, or is this in one of the capital funds?
I think in the non-departmental there was $30,000 for document imaging.
90,000, but I can find the page for it. It's just I thought maybe it was in your area. All right. Just real quick on the CIP. I think I saw or somehow someone got back with me, Steve, maybe it was yourself, of course to the city manager, that the payback on the light replacement was 15 years. Is that something like that?
That did not, we're not sure where that came from. And I think you're talking about the Surrey Street lighting replacement.
Yes.
And really the reason why we're proposing that and all of that money in 1 year is because it's a public safety issue. We have concerns about that type of system. It's the last remaining Surrey Street lighting system within the town. So the reason for that wasn't to try to replace the existing with more energy efficient. It was strictly a public safety issue. And what we can do between now and the next meeting is provide you some additional information, because that really isn't described that well in our description, but we can provide you some additional information of why we think it's important to make that investment at this time.
All right, yeah, because it would be good to see. Public safety obviously takes precedence, but I think it was also billed as a return on investment basis, but maybe that was just something that was added in, and I heard more of that than the other.
Could you tell us what streets, how many streets and where it's going to cover as well?
You know, I'm going to ask Steve to respond to that.
Well, when in your report, you don't have to do it.
Oh, okay.
Just when you get back, if you tell us specifically what we're going to get done and
Sure.
if there's a return on investment. On some of these things, there is a return on investment, and if we could do that and show what the discounted cash flows will be, that would be terrific. I appreciate it. And then, I guess we need to have a rendering, I guess, on some of these funds, because when I look at, I spoke with Deborah yesterday, but when I added up the numbers for all the different funds and then looked at what we said we have this year, sometimes they didn't net out 100%. So we just want to make sure that we've got all the funds right. I know that there was some discussion that perhaps there was some carryover that didn't get spent. So we just need to make sure that we're not spending more than we're taking in. And because there's like a $300,000 difference. And that we want to make sure that, especially if we're going to reallocate pension money and any other money in this budget, all the money is going to be a little bit tight if we want to do all the right things. So we want to make sure that we're not having any gotchas. And if we start something, we can finish it. Thanks. Sure. Make all the work.
So, Mike, I'm looking at your projected budget expenditure pie chart, and you've got $30,000 for bike lane, and then another $40,000 budget for bike, pedestrian, master plan, and general plan circulation. I'm happy to see that. I'd like to have a little bit more explanation and understanding of what your vision is to make our bike lanes more safe. I've heard from several residents, in fact this one resident, he has a couple of kids, had his wife drop them off at the corner of Stockbridge and El Camino, and they just took an experiment and they walked down Stockbridge Road to their side street, Patricia, and it was extraordinarily unsafe, and he says we have got to do something about our streets to make them a little bit more pedestrian friendly. And I know that the bike lanes along El Camino, where there is a stripe, it seems to be terribly overgrown. I guess that's not our maintenance issues, that's the issues with Caltrans, or can we clean up some of, oh, Steve hasn't commented.
We have the maintenance contract for that, but remember, those are not bike lanes, those are emergency shoulders.
Oh.
Those are not bike lanes.
Those aren't bike lanes?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, people are using them as bike lanes.
Well, that may be, but they're not bike lanes officially, they're not recommended.
Is there an ability to kind of make them a bike lane by clearing back more and signing them?
We do that on a regular basis.
Okay. Anyway.
Councilmembers, the distinction is that the $30,000 in the bike lane project, what that is basically providing thermoplastic, which will provide a much higher reflective, better lane striping than just paint. And also put all the decals where we do have the Class 2 bike lanes throughout town. And the bike ped master plan, what that one's about is really to address and take a look at at a more system basis, the current bike and pedestrian safety issues. And also the County of San Mateo just completed a pretty comprehensive bike master plan. And although the town of Atherton was not included in it, they did identify areas where, where it did make sense from a connectivity standpoint. So basically we're going to use that as a starting point to create the town's own bike plan, as well as different strategies to improve pedestrian safety.
Well, this is, am I safe to say that this is the first time this kind of budget item has been in our budget? Or have we had this in the past?
That, I don't know, since this is my first budget like this. But
I'm thrilled to see us, if we can afford it, I think that we need to really focus on pedestrian bike safety in our town.
Oh, and one thing, if I can, during our budget workshop, Councilmember McKeithen, you had asked about, when you take a look at the total CIP, it's about $2.68 million. And you had asked how that compared to prior years. So we went back 5 years, and actually, it's been kind of all over the map. In the last 5 years, the CIP ranged anywhere from a low of $940,000 to a high of about $4.9 million.
Yeah, I knew it was almost $5 million one year.
But what's interesting is when you average it out, it's $2.8 million, which is approximately what we're programming this year.
One thing that I think we should be congratulated on, we got a lot of criticism here in the council, but when I look at this budget, most of our savings from last year are coming from the changes we made in the building department and the public works department. Nearly all of our savings are coming from that. And I think we should give ourselves some kudos for making some very difficult decisions last year. Not all of them were appreciated. And you know, once in a while, I think we do make the right decisions. And clearly, based upon the comments I get, as far as service goes, we've improved the service, we've reduced the costs, and boy, you know, can you do much better than that? So thank you so much.
That's right, we couldn't even be thinking about paying off our Gatsby PERS obligation or that side fund without that. I do have a couple of questions for you. Mostly, I think, not just questions, but to point out, it's interesting that we're going to be funding our tree maintenance by an additional $50,000. I think that's a good idea. If you've been reading the New York Times articles about what's been happening in New York with these lawsuits throughout Manhattan and the other boroughs. Is there a particular reason besides the fact we don't want such liability that we've determined that we want to put that much more into tree maintenance?
Well, I think one of the real benefits that you have here is having your public works superintendent being an arborist, and really who has that knowledge and appreciates the tree. I don't have that background. And you're right, when you take a look at potential liability risk, that's really why Steve advocated very strongly that we needed to, if we could, we needed to increase that budget significantly.
I mean, one $4 million lawsuit pays for a lot of tree maintenance. Also, just because it was so close to it, I noticed that we're going to have, you've put a lot more in the budget for electrical repair and maintenance. Is there some issue somewhere?
We don't have any electricians on staff, so any electrical problem, from a plug that doesn't work in town hall to a street light problem that can't be fixed by PG&E by changing the bulb or some of their normal maintenance, we need to get electricians out. Series street lighting that's old and defective, and those type of things, a lot of